Hello. Happy Friday. I'm in the throes of nicotine withdrawal. I believe I'm in the manic, depressive, delirious mood swing phase. 2 days ago, I felt like pretty good, oddly good. Yesterday, I didn't really have a single positive thought. I've just been confused, forgetful, stressed, feeling a little kooky. The world's felt pretty kooky, you know? Got this weird lump in my throat that is also stressing me out. Kind of explains my hoarseness. Um, Made an appointment for that March 18th. I called every ear, nose, throat doctor in my area that is accepting new patients as well as Medicaid. I'm gonna try and maybe get seen by a primary care physician before that. But all that's to say, a little stressed lately. Just trying to stay focused, distract myself, do something that's productive. So today, I figured I'd make a video on one of my most abused techniques in phase plant that I've covered here and there. It's buried throughout, a good handful of videos and many of the streams I've done. But this way, there'll be one video that people can refer to know exactly how to do this technique. It's a technique that I picked up from KOAN Sound, where they put a bass sound that has a decent amount of movement, filtering or otherwise, baked into it already, like a recorded bit of audio, basically. Could be 20 seconds of bass sound audio, could be a minute, could be 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I'm going to try and keep it shorter because we're going to start with making one of these sounds that we're going to then put into a sampler. But the KOAN Sound approach, they had a video that they'd put out on their Patreon in like 2020, 2021, I forget. It was right after I quit alcohol. I subbed to their Patreon. It was like the first and only video I watched on their Patreon. And I was subbed for like another 2 or 3 years, but I just didn't feel the need to watch anything else because of how much like inspiration and spunk this one video had given me. Where they take a bass sound, they put it in Simpler, and then they play the Simpler patch like a MIDI instrument, and then they automate the start position, and they automate the volume, and or maybe some filter movement and stuff on top of that as well. I tried it out in Simpler. I got familiar with how it is in Simpler. I tried it out in Sampler. I did find that I think I prefer it in Sampler. I'm always open to being wrong on that front. For all I know, there's reasons that KOAN Sound uses Simpler that I'm just not aware of. I can only assume that that's the case. I know that Simpler might be better if you're trying to do like arpeggiator stuff to get like variety out of your bass sound using something like Simpler. I think Simpler's better for like arpeggiator kind of a thing, among other things too. I'll go over the pros and cons of doing this approach, this mudpie bass sample utilized inside of a sampler technique. It doesn't really have a name, not that I'm aware of. But I'll go over the pros and cons of doing it in Simpler, in Sampler, and in Phase Plant's Sampler. But you can do this in really any plugin that has a sampler. So if you're not in Ableton and you're trying to find a third-party plugin that could help facilitate you being able to do this, I would just search for any kind of sampler, really. Phase Plant, I highly recommend because it does have a sampler. All you need is $10, and you can use Phase Plant for 30 days. And those $10 go towards, on the Kilohertz website, if you're subscribed there, goes towards coupons, basically, or tokens that you can eventually cash in and then just own Phase Plant. I think Phase Plant costs $200. So if you're subscribed for 20 months, then I think on the 20th month, you can just cash in those tokens or coupons, credits, whatever they are, and then you can just own Phase Plant, and you can stop paying that money. I'm going to start by making a bass sound. You could do it in any synth. I'm going to do this in Operator. so that we can use it inside of a sampler. And again, I'll go over this in Simpler, I'll go over it in Sampler, and then I'll go over it in Phase Plant. I'll talk about my reasons for what I like about, either or any of those. So let's get after it. I'm going to try and not get too carried away as far as making the initial bass sound. I'm going to try and stick to around 20 or so seconds. I already got like something started here a little bit. How long is this? It shows you down here right at the bottom. When you have some time highlighted on the timeline. Right now this says 24 seconds. How about this? That's 20. Maybe I'll just make that a little teeny tiny bit shorter. Okay. So I'm an operator. I've chose this routing here. So this yellow one and this darker blue one are in parallel. These are the carriers, or in other words, these are the oscillators that we hear. We don't hear this light blue one or this orange one. We're just going to hear the effects that they have on either of these two outputs. So on A and on C, they're basically just sine waves. I had just chosen sine, and then I just drew in a few choice harmonics. So if let's just mute everything so we only hear one. Sounds like this. Turn off this LFO. So as you can see, this is the third harmonic, fifth, seventh, ninth. I'm not going to get too much into harmonics, but this just kind of gives it a little bit more weight and a little bit more presence as opposed to if it was just this. And I have basically the same thing on C as well. Since they're both playing in parallel, that's why it's sounding a little clipped. I have a clipper on at the end of this here. And these are both just playing side by side right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to modulate each of these with something different. So on B, I'm just drawing in some shit here. It sounds like this. You could really draw in whatever you want. And then C, I have modulated by something else. And I have a different ratio here. So FM, it's all about ratios, baby. What ratio you have in your FM modulator carrier relationship is going to really say everything about how it sounds. It's going to have everything to do with like the harmonic footprint that's left. So like here's 1-to-1, which to me sounds like more like a cat purring or something. You get both odd and even harmonics with this 1-to-1 thing ratio. The 2-to-1 is to me it's like more squarey. One way I like to think about the presence of even harmonics versus not having even harmonics present, because you're always going to have odd harmonics present. Like I don't think that there's you have a square is only odd harmonics, and a saw is just even and odd harmonics. Again, I'm going to try and not get too much into harmonics, but like one way of thinking about the difference between a sound that has even and odd harmonics versus a sound that's only odd harmonics is it's basically the difference between a square and a saw wave. So that's what either of these little FM routings will represent. This is going to be the more squarey vibe with the 2-to-1. And then this, I'll make it a 1-to-1. It'll be kind of more sawy. Obviously, this isn't going to sound quite like a saw. Getting carried away. I'm going to stop. Okay, so this is the sort of more saw-ish kind of a sound. It's got even and odd harmonics. That's what I mean by that. It's got the 1-to-1 ratio. This is the 2-to-1 ratio. It's kind of more of a squarey kind of a vibe. And now I'm going to choose this LFO here. by default, destination A is linked to the pitch of all of the oscillators. I turned that off, and I just enabled destination B. You can link it to a whole host of things. I've chosen crossfade A/C, so that means that when I bring this amount up here, then it's going to raise this up as it lowers this, and vice versa. When this is up, this is going to go down. We're not going to see this, but that's what's happening. So if I just hit space right now, that's what we're going to hear. It's going to be flip-flopping back and forth between these two and these two. So what I'm looking to do right now is just get 20 seconds of just like solid bass sounds and movement that is all usable, right? Because like really 20 seconds of mudpie that where 100% of it is stuff I'd want to use is definitely more efficient, if nothing else, than, you know, 5-minute mudpie where maybe only 30 seconds I want to use or a minute I want to use. You know, that's very often the case when I take a more random approach, where I'm just kind of like, you know, mapping random shit to random shit with a bunch of free running LFOs and so on. But I think that taking a more surgical approach like this can totally be worth it. It can be pretty insightful as well, because it's very easy to go back and be like, oh yeah, this is what made it sound like that. It's a lot harder to do that if it's, say, 5 to 10 minutes long, and if there's a lot of random movement and stuff, it's kind of harder to like take lessons from that and like insights. Take a sip of water here. So before I start modulating, turning this LFO on, and then automating this amount, automating the rate maybe, I'm going to turn this off for now. And I'm going to put this in a group. So I've gone over an approach like similar to this in the past, and where I'm basically going to make use of detuning. It's one of my favorite things. There's a number of different ways that you can go about getting detuning, but one of those ways is to play with the fine tuning of a modulator in an FM relationship such as this. The more out of tune it is, the faster that beating is going to be. Pulse, you could call it, the movement. And now I could map this to a macro. And then I'm going to just play, I'm going to set the ceiling. I'm going to click this map and I'm going to play with the ceiling, because I probably won't really use any higher than 100, probably not even that high. So I'm going to press map. I'm going to just change that maximum value to 100. I'm also going to try and not zoom in too much so I'm not covering anything down here. So if I want this to sound a little bit tighter, right, I could map this one here. So as you can see, I'm on this one. This is the modulator. This is the one that we don't hear. We just hear the effects that it has on this one from B modulating A. So I'm going to also map the fine tuning of the modulator D, which is modulating C. And now I could make the ceiling the same number, and that'll probably give us a pretty tight beating or pulse. But if I want a little bit more variety, if I don't want it to be like basically just the same cycle over and over and over again, I could just like tweak one of these a little bit. And what that'll do is basically make it take a little bit longer. It'll take like a few more rotations, a good amount more rotations of like the things going in and out of tune again before the cycle actually repeats and you start to hear the same thing again. So I'm going to call this Detuning, and I'm going to automate this. That's probably fine. This tone knob here, this won't do anything if you're not doing any FM. So like this here, this is like all in parallel. If you had like a bunch of saw waves and shit in here and then you're playing with this and you're like, oh, why the fuck's it not doing anything? That's because there's no FM here. And this is basically just like a filter that exists like in between any like 2 points of modulation that you might have. So it's going to basically be on B and on D, this tone thing. What the hell? Oh, I changed it. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Whoops. So I'm going to automate this tone. Am I clipping here? Oh yeah, clipping. That'll probably change once I turn this LFO on, since this LFO, I don't remember if I had explained this already, pretty sure I did, but it's just gonna flip-flop back and forth between A being on and C being on. We're not gonna see this happen, but that's what's happening. So whenever C is up, we're not gonna hear A, which means we're also not gonna hear B. And whenever A is up, we're not gonna hear C, which means we're not gonna also hear D as well. So I am going to turn this down a little bit. Turn up my master a little. Cool. So now I'm going to play with the rate of this. I'm going to automate the rate of that LFO. That's flip-flopping back and forth between A and C. So that's some decent movement for sure. What I like to do when I have like a mudpie is I like to have moments that are kind of more emphasis on only odd harmonics, and then moments where it's both odd and even. So again, another really simple way of thinking about that, maybe reductive, but super simple way of thinking about it, is I like to have moments that sound more squarey and moments that sound more sawy, okay? So what I might do, since this is the sawy one, right? This is the one that's got even and odd harmonics, because I'm using the one-to-one relationship here. Maybe I'll also just help this LFO out, and I'll just lower this now and then. I'll automate this. I could just record that. I won't arm this because I'm not trying to overwrite the MIDI. I'm just going to click this, and then I'm going to hit space, and I'm just going to wiggle this knob. Now there's a few moments where it felt like it got a little quiet. I can just sort of make adjustments there. First, I'm going to simplify this envelope. Let's hear that one more time. Because you know, with this LFO flip-flopping back and forth between these two, because it's a sine wave, we're gonna hear those even harmonics like most of the time. Like very rarely, I mean, when C goes down, relying on this, it's not gonna go down all the way for really very long at all. So at almost any given point, we're still gonna be hearing those even harmonics from this, unless I give it that little extra nudge, and then also just turn this down as well. Whoops. Also, if I want even more variety, I could turn off the retrigger on all of these so that they start from a different point in their phase each time. So that means that every time I hit space, the phase relationship between all these oscillators or operators technically is going to be potentially in a different spot each time. So if I have MIDI that gets retriggered throughout this clip more often, then I could potentially just have a little bit more variety throughout this whole thing. Let's maybe do like this. You know, I'm going to run the risk of having some clicks and pops in here too, but that's probably fine. So let's just hit space a few times, right? And this, you'll see what I'm talking about probably. Can you make it so that this LFO triggers from a different spot, like randomly each time? I don't know that you can. Oh, yeah, here we go. Sounds a little different each time. You probably get what you probably catch my drift. Maybe I'll automate these as well. Maybe I'll just wiggle these around as I record a little bit. Do the same thing for this. And you know, I'm kind of regretting. I plan on doing this in like one take. This is like my third or fourth try. I kind of regret, you know, automating this one. I don't want to like throw people off. Don't even fucking worry about it. Also, this part, you know, you could do whatever you want for this part, really. Like, I'm just making 20-second sounds so that I can use in a sampler. It could really, however you go about doing that is entirely up to you. You know, if you want, you can always fast forward to the part where I start actually putting it in samplers and stuff. But I think I'm gonna delete this automation here on C. There was just a few moments where it was sounding too quiet, and because I had turned off this retrigger, then I couldn't really go and tailor and make sure that, like, you know, it's gonna be reliably not ever getting quiet at any given point throughout this. So I'll just turn that off. All right, cool. Let's add a little bit more movement. Maybe I'll just do a notch. Yeah, I'm gonna record. How are we doing on headroom? Cool. So if we want, I can add another layer of detuning. Basically, if you're ever in Serum or Vital or Current or like any wavetable or subtractive synth like Massive, you'll see often see a unison parameter where you can add or remove voices. By default, pretty much most synths I'm aware of start with one voice, and then you can do 2 voices. You can do as many as like 8 or 16 on a lot of synths. Fun fact, when you add spread on Operator, you're basically adding an additional voice, and each voice gets put in the left and the right channel. So the more spread it is, the more detuned the left and the right are from one another. It just they get detuned in equal and opposite directions. So when things are stereo and wide with detuning in this sense, it doesn't really sound like detuning so much. It just sounds kind of separate and sounds a little weird. Depends on what you're going for. If you're going for a fat, chonky bass sound, then like using the spread and then keeping that width might not really be the vibe. Let's just see. But an interesting thing though is if you add a utility and make it mono, then you get sort of a Reese vibe. 100% might be a little much, but let's just bring it down to 0 for a sec. And now I'm going to add a little bit of spread. Here, let's retrigger everything for just a second so that everything sounds exactly the same when I hit space. Now, when I add a little bit of this, do you hear that? It's like a pew, pew, pew. Now that the rate or the speed of that pew is going to be faster the more spread this is. So right here, there's none. But yeah, you're only going to get this if you make it mono after spreading it. I hope you hear what I'm referring to. So this can be a cool additional layer to add. So maybe I'll automate this. So if you automate this spread while a MIDI note is pressed, you're not going to actually hear that automation. It only makes a difference wherever the spread is when a new MIDI note gets triggered is how it's going to be the whole time until another MIDI note gets triggered. So maybe for some of these, can I even fucking see where MIDI starts and ends? Well, I think if I click around in here, it shows me. Oh, or does it? Maybe it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. Okay. No? Well, how about this? I'll just have it start mono or no spread, no pew. Here's the second one. Here's the third one. Here's the fourth one. Here's the fifth one. I'm also gonna turn back on the or turn back off the retriggering on all these. Just for variety's sake. Like retriggering something that you might want to have on if you're using a MIDI instrument in the arrangement of a project, and it's like, you know, something that you want to sound reliably the same every time, just so that you're not driving yourself nuts. I think this is sounding pretty solid. I think I might add an additional notch. I'll do an auto filter, because the Ableton notch is honestly kind of mids, if I'm being honest, but the best way you can sort of make up for that is just adding a second one. I'm going to record this. There is this brief moment here where the detuning gets to be a little much. I'll just bring that down. Now, there are a few moments where it feels as though we're losing a good amount of sub. What I could do is just take these and put them like this, and I could just make another operator, put it in here, just a sine wave, maybe turn it down, sub. And if I really want to get pretty crazy, because, you know, sometimes I overcomplicate things, right? And one could argue I already have. But, you know, I like trying to do things where it's, you know, maybe a little bit different sounding, or maybe even more interesting than just your standard saw or square. But I'll call this one WHACKIER. And then I'm going to make another operator. And on this one, I'll just call this saw square. And I'll make it exactly that. I'll do a square. I'll do the same thing here. Same routing as the other one. I'll make this other one a saw. Bring this up to 0. Maybe here on this LFO, I'll click on it so it'll appear at the top. I'll copy this automation. I'll map this LFO rate. Cool. Now I'll automate that. I'll paste the automation I just had. Now I can map this LFO there as well. And, you know, since maybe just for the sake, since I'm doing it like this, I'll enable the retrigger on both of these just so that they actually sound like they're doing the same thing. Oh, wait a minute. I accidentally mapped the amount instead of the rate. Let's do the rate. Nice. And then I'll map this. I'll bring up the amount on here. So now this is just a saw and a square, and it's flip-flopping back and forth between them. Oops. Let me, this isn't set up right. This LFO, again, by default, that's on the pitch of each oscillator. On B, I'll set it to the A and C. And maybe I'll do the same thing with this spread here. I'll click this, copy the automation of the spread. Maybe I'll map the spread. And then I'll paste that automation. And then I'll map this spread to the spread. Oh, let's put that utility here. And this one, maybe I'll give this one some different movement, right? It doesn't need to be the same. I mean, technically, none of this needs to be anything besides what you want it to be. Just going to solo this saw square one, and then I'll actually just record me wiggling this around. Cool, so now I think I want to flip-flop back and forth between these two. How might I do that? Maybe manually? Maybe manually. I'm just going to automate the level of this saw square. And then I'll automate the level of the other one. And I'll just kind of try and do more or less an inverse kind of a shape. So you notice these movements, these moments where like these intersect, right? Like around here. Because it's not linear, you might run into it sounding like quieter at these intersections. That's why I didn't map it to a macro where it's just inverse. You turn one down, the other one goes up. Because then I won't really have any flexibility at these intersections and sort of making them sound, you know, less quiet at any given point. Or more quiet. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of going through and I'm making sure that the level's kind of nice and steady. Because then if we're going to put an OTT on here anyway, it's going to level out those differences. I'm just going to copy this filter and I'm going to put it on this, the saw and square one. And I'll just maybe like flip it. Cool, maybe to make it a little more interesting, and then this will be like one of the last things I do basically. I'll slap on a roar here. And then maybe I'll just get an EQ8. I'm control clicking and dragging this EQ8 over here to copy it. And maybe I'll just find a few moments to, like few harmonics to maybe just boost here and there. And I'm going to bring up the scale. Let's see, what are our options here? Here, I'll just automate me playing with this. Maybe I'll just do one more EQ8, do the same kind of vibe, but kind of less peaky and kind of more sort of just subtle differences like this. Not bad. I think this is probably more than enough movement. Don't make fun of me. Where's that OTT? Did I accidentally replace it? Or is it in... nah, I want it after. All right, that's it. Let's see if I don't hate this. I'm going to freeze this. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to flatten it. Oh, well, wait. Here. First, I actually wanted to take off that clipper on the end. Yes. Let's do that again. Because with this sort of thing, I've been trying to not have the too much clipping basically in the original sample because I'm going to be adding a lot of clipping. Inevitably, it's going to get clipped again later, so I try and minimize the amount of times things get clipped if I can. It's still quite clipped. Is that just from the roar, I bet? Let's see how it sounds. All right, it's not perfect, but it'll do. I'm going to Control-Shift-M, make a new MIDI lane, and now we're going to go on to the simpler part. I'm going to Control-F, simpler, enter, enter. Got our simpler here. Now I can just drag this into the simpler. I'll make a note. Or maybe I'll make a little riff. I'll explain why it sounds like that in a sec. So, with simpler, I don't believe that you get to choose the root note. I don't think you can tune it. Unless I'm wrong and they've updated it, I don't believe that you can. So, in order to do that, you need a little pitch thing here. Now, if I really wanted to just make it easy on myself to actually see, is this the right tuning? I'll just make one note like this, and then I will tweak this. And it should sound like this. Yep. So this is the right tuning, I guess, for a low C. That's what I did it over here, is a low C. So now, when I play this little riff here, so you notice it's retriggering from the same point each time, from the very beginning. But if you were to move this around, now, how do you do this, and which one of these is it? Is it on the classic? What you would want to do is play with the start position. You could automate this. And now, the automation doesn't make a difference, just like with the spread on the operator. While the MIDI note is depressed, if you automate it, you're not going to hear that movement. It's only going to make a difference wherever the parameter is at the start of a new MIDI note is where it will play from. You notice how, despite me wiggling this, you can see the playhead just kind of doing its own thing. So, okay, where am I? I could have these glide into each other, and then when they glide into each other, it's that same vibe. So long as I set this to one voice first, then when the notes are gliding into each other, then wherever this starts from, wherever this MIDI note starts from, it won't make any difference what I do with this MIDI or with this automation until it gets retriggered again where it doesn't glide into it. So because this note glides into this note, that means that it will just play from this point, and it won't matter what I do here until or unless the MIDI gets retriggered without a glide. So like right here. Whoops, but I think I got a, what is it, this? No. What do I gotta press? Is it in here? Oh, you can tune it now. Oh, nice. Oh, hell yeah. That's pretty cool. No, just kidding. Or yeah, there, the transpose. Aha, glide. Here we go. So like if I have this note also glide into here, then it'll be the same idea I was saying before, where the start position in the simpler will start from here and it will play all throughout this. It glides into that one. This one glides into that one. And no matter what changes I make to the automation, it won't matter until it gets triggered again without that glide. So another thing that KOAN Sound would do is play with the pitch bend range here, which I think by default, I guess there already is some. Or maybe not. Where is this? I don't use it. I don't use Sampler too often for this, or in fact, I just don't really at all. I did at first. This is which one is this? Let's see. Is that this? Is that this range? Yes, it is. Is it, what's this? Oh yeah. So a lot of times what I'll do here is I'll put this in a group, and then this start, I'll click it so I can copy this, and I'll map this to a macro. I'll call this start. I'll automate that. I'll just paste that automation that I had. And now I'll have another macro on the pitch bend amount, pitch envelope amount. I'll call it PENV amount. And this only makes a difference when the note gets retriggered also. It's just at the start of a new MIDI note that's not glided into. And then I'll also map the decay. Automate that. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. We're really getting into the meat and potatoes. So like one of the reasons why I didn't like using Sampler actually is because in the past, I don't know that you were able to tune it in earlier versions of Ableton. I don't think that you were able to like choose like the transposition on it like this. I could be wrong. I don't remember, honestly. What was another reason? Oh yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't know that I do. They're very similar. It frankly doesn't really matter all that much which one you do. But now here, KOAN Sound would take another approach, an additional layer of movement, where they basically have like a low and a high. I just duplicated this EQ8 here. And now on the low, be something like this. And on the high, be something like this. And now you could think about this just like a split, right? Where it's like, okay, this is just a split here, more or less the same frequency as the low. And then I maybe can process this differently than this, right? But what they were doing, among other things, was, and by they I mean KOAN Sound, moving this around to just kind of like tailor make each like moment and just add like a little bit more articulation. So I'm just going to leave this right here for now though, because, oh, magnifier. Because I'm going to add a utility, and I made a little macro for a utility like this. It's really just a utility where the ceiling is at 0, and that's it. This is really just meant for volume automation. That's like why I'll use this macro, this rack here. So I'm going to automate this. Well, maybe I'll put this in here first. Macro this. I'm going to call this play because this is what I'm going to play with. And now I'm going to automate this play here. You probably see me do this before. You right click in here. You can insert these shapes. Now I could like duplicate this. I could duplicate that again. I could maybe like flip it. Maybe on this point. If you hold control when you click on these points, then you can mirror it or stretch it. If I'm not holding control, I'm just going to pull it up, basically. Maybe I'll control flip this around. So now the volume automation, I basically think of as like my main point of like articulation, right? Like there's really no parameter that can have quite as great of an impact on, you know, the experience of the listener as volume. It's just like the most obvious thing that anyone could ever really automate, and you can get quite a bit of mileage out of it. Honestly, volume has got to be one of my favorite things to automate on basses. I think it sounds a lot less corny than like filter movement can sound, but I also like sometimes instead of volume being my main thing, like a utility, such as in this case, sometimes I'll use like a low pass filter or something, or sometimes even a mix of both. So let me automate this high pass here as well. And like normally, you know, I guess I would be sort of tailor making each of these moments, right? If this was like in the context of the arrangement of a tune, then I'd probably be more carefully automating this kind of a thing. But also it's worth saying, I typically don't really automate a high pass like this in mine. Usually if I am going to split it, which I pretty much usually do, I'll kind of leave it. My thoughts behind that being, there's already kind of high pass movement in my mudpies, right? Like, you know, with all the notches and everything, it more or less has the same effect, right? Because like if I have the filter, if I have the frequency of this high pass up here, right? And then this low is down here, that means that there's a gap like right here, right? And that's what a notch is. Because I have the notch movements in there, I, you know, don't always really worry about this, but maybe it's just because I'm lazy, I'm making excuses. But I'll do it for the sake of this video. I'll automate some of this high pass movement here. I'm going to not arm this because I just want to record that automation. I don't want to record any new MIDI. I think you're probably starting to get the idea though. I could slap another OTT on here. We're starting to get excessive, right? That's basically me. Can't help it. I have tendencies. Okay, so next thing, that pretty much covers most of the basses here, right? We've got the start, the pitch amount, the pitch envelope decay, and then the play, which is just volume. I could automate this amount as well. Maybe just have it be up high sometimes, a little bit lower other times. Let me also simplify this high pass, and I can tweak this a bit at some of those moments where it sounds a little messy. Okay, so you're probably starting to get the idea, right? Now, let's just call this simpler. And then I'm just going to grab a sampler, and I don't even have to redo this, right? I can just put the sampler in here. I can drag this bass sound in there. I can tune it, which I think the root is like a C0. And now here, see, in sampler, there is no obvious way to automate this start point here. But one way that you can do it, let me turn off this shit here. One way that you can do it is under the modulation tab. You click this auxiliary thing, and this is like an envelope, but don't even think about it like that right now, okay? This peak is going to be our start position, so I'm going to automate, I'll macro this to start. And then I'm just going to change that to sample offset, and I'm going to set this to 100. So now this will allow us to move this around, the start position. This itself is not going to move, but you're going to see the playhead jump around, and what you're going to hear basically is that it's doing the same exact thing as the simpler. Let's also just turn on the pitch envelope. I'll automate the amount to pitch envelope amount, and the decay to pitch envelope decay. And let's see. Let me just I'm going to take this out of here. I'm going to lose my automation. But that's okay, because I can just copy it. So this play. Or I could actually put it in a really big rack like this. How about that? Yeah, and then I'll just macro this to... oh, no, but then I'd have to macro these. Oh, bollocks. That's all right. I'll just do that really quick. Click on the start. Copy the start. Macro the start. Automate that again. Click. Copy. Macro. Click. Paste. Click. Copy. Macro. Click. Paste. Macro 4, what the hell was that? Oh, that was this. That was this here. This high pass movement. I'm going to just macro this here. HP, Harry Potter, Hewlett Packard. Map that to 4. Click. Paste. Okay, cool. So now this is set up where I should be able to A/B these basically, and they should sound exactly the same. Let's set this to 1 voice on the sampler. Let's have some glide as well, which is here. And then I'll solo this. It should sound the same. Oh. Okay, I guess the root's in F. What the hell? Am I crazy? Really? That's weird. Sure. Okay. It's just, I don't know why that is F. But don't worry about it. You can see that they're the same, right? And look, you can see the playhead move around on this one. That orange line. I think that the takeaway already is looking like maybe less is more in terms of movement on the original sound, right? I told myself I wasn't going to get carried away on the original sound, the mudpie that was going to go inside of these samplers, and I kind of did, and I guess that's all right. I'm not going to worry about it too much. But yeah, because when I followed the KOAN Sound tutorial, like theirs was actually a lot more simple, and I liked the results more. I think that it was just like detune fucking saw waves or something, in like some basic filtering, right? I don't think that they had, you know, anything complex necessarily like what I did. Not to act like mine is big brain, because maybe the real big brain move is to not be a big brain sometimes. So now we've seen this in both sampler and simpler. Same shit, right? Now let's get a phase plant. I'm going to do the same thing. Solo this, open up phase plant. For any of you where phase plant is entirely new to you, you got generators here. So you got like oscillator, like analog oscillators. You can have a granulizer. There's a noise thing, a sampler, as well as a wavetable. I'm going to add the sampler. I'm going to drag this in. Nice. It worked. I'm going to tune it. And then I'm going to make this mono, legato, do a little glide. I'm going to do an envelope. This is for the pitch. In phase plant, if you ever go to configure something in phase plant and it seems like, ah, man, looks like I can't configure that. Oh, does this mean I have to use a macro? Son of a bitch. That is not true. You don't need to use a macro. All you have to do actually is right click on whatever it is you want to automate, and then you can assign it to an automation slot. You have up to 64. Once I assign this to a slot, now I can wiggle this and it shows up as something I can automate. So I'll map this to the pitch envelope amount. I might need to mess with the minimum and maximum values and the mappings here. We'll see how it sounds in a second. I'm gonna also configure. So first I'll map this to the pitch, the master pitch. I'll do 48 semitones. That's 4 octaves. And now here, this is like the amount of the envelope. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'll configure this. I'll assign this a slot 2. I'll wiggle this around. And then I'll map this to pitch envelope amount. This is mapped to the, I'll map this to the decay. And then the start position, we're going to want to do that. That is the offset here. Same shit, assigned to a slot 3. Configure. I can wiggle this. And now I can map this to the start position. And oh yeah, let's map this play as well over to macro. Oh, I think that the Harry Potter is mapped to the wrong thing. And Harry Potter needs to be mapped. Oh, well, no, maybe it is right. I'm confusing myself. The play, I'll put on 5. I think I just need to redo the automation for the play. That's cool. Don't worry about it. Or no, that's, yeah, I see. It's the Harry Potter automation I have to redo. So, because this is the play automation. I just messed up my macros. Paste that. Since this is the high pass, I'm just going to say fuck it, and I'm just going to kind of do this. And then maybe give it some of these. This is sounding kooky crazy. And I think part of that is because the ceiling of that pitch envelope, or the decay time, rather, the maximum amount of the decay time in the phase plant is probably a lot longer than it is in phase plant, or operator that is. So I'm going to tweak that. So let's look at phase plant, automation slot. Which one is the decay time? Let's see. Pull this up. Yeah, it's this one here. When I move this one, it's not like labeled here in a way that I can tell what it is. Oh yeah, it is, I guess. Cool. This is also saying it's F. That's confusing. I don't necessarily understand that. confused. Wait, what's happening? Why do the tunings sound different? I'm not really sure. I'm not going to try and answer that right now. It's probably something really simple, but I think that the point still stands though, right? I've just mapped the start, which in this case is the offset, the decay of the pitch envelope, the amount of the pitch envelope, and then the high pass of the split are all mapped to the same things. This is kind of gone rogue. This isn't mapped to anything. That's fine. You don't even necessarily need this much control again, right? Like most of the time, like I said earlier, when I do this approach and I have a split, such as this one, I usually have, I don't really automate it because I already have a lot of movement in my bass sounds. Let's turn off this OTT. Is that making it sound like shit? So, I mean, I feel like this could have overall been a better demonstration of this technique just because it sounds kind of bad to me right now. But let's just see something real quick. Like if I go and find maybe like a short mudpie, if I have one. Can you sort it by length? I don't know if you can. I actually really like one of these mud pies. Which one is it? Yeah. Oh, I love this one. I'm just gonna lock this here. I'm just gonna replace this. When you lock this, it prevents this root from changing. Because if I don't, then the root I think resets to C4 in phase plant. So now it's gonna start sounding drastically different from these two because I'm gonna go off course here. What is it? E flat, it said, I think, in the sample itself. E flat. I'm just going to turn this off for a second. This sample is actually crazy. There's a lot of movement in it, like a lot of faster movements, which can be dicey with this approach, especially with the pitch envelope, because when that happens, that movement is going to sound even faster when the pitch is going up. But let's just play with the start position maybe and see if we can actually get anything usable out of this. Otherwise, I'll switch it with another sample again. Nah, I'm going to do a different one. What's in 2025? I don't know if I got much in here. No, I don't. I don't have shit in here. But I did make some sounds last night. I'm just going to Control F wave, and then I'm going to sort by date. No, this was just earlier today. See if there's any cool bits in here. I think this is also at a C. Since this is longer, it might take a second to load. I'm doing really small little movements right now. Like I'm holding shift. I think you can even edit the value, right? Like, and you can get like down to the decimals. So like that was 4.6 or 46.002. Let's try like 009 and see if it sounds different. Nope. So maybe it is more like only 2 decimal points. Let's try this. 46.02. I'll just copy that. Okay, now I'll edit the value. I'll paste, but I'll change this to like 9. I think it actually might be a little different, but let's just do 46.04. No. All right, 46.08. Whoops. So maybe it is only the 1 decimal point. It's hard to tell. Feel free to chime in the comments if you know for sure whether it's 1 or 2 decimal points that you get. I think it might be 2, and it's just that maybe this sample is so long that it doesn't make that big of a difference, or so short. I forget exactly. It's like I mix it up like lefts and rights almost, that sort of a thing. So let's just do 46.2. Yeah. Now let's do 46.5. 46.9. Yeah. Okay, you see what I'm saying? In phase plant, I make sure that the start position, actually the change that I want, happens a little bit before the new MIDI starts, because if it's not, if it just happens right when it starts, then it might retrigger from wherever it left off. So like if this is doing some stuff differently over here, and like I hit spacebar here to stop the playback, and then I start it again from here, it might sound like wherever the automation was over here. In other words, it's not reliable in phase plant unless you actually have it start a little bit early. Why is this stuff? It could just be in the sample. There's like a moment of silence. Because we're not hearing this right now, which has got the utility on it. what's funny? I had a really rough day yesterday, and I feel like I had a rough stream. Not every stream is going to be perfect, right? Obviously, especially like if I'm going to be doing it more often, but I was just feeling really uninspired. I was feeling really cranky. I was feeling really just uncertain and dysregulated, and I kind of started the stream high, but I was feeling so uninspired. I was feeling kind of insecure, imposter syndrome, whatever. And I was like, all right, fuck it. I'm just going to go and Razor. I'm going to mess around. And I was just kind of doing one note sound design, making a mudpie in Razor. And it just wasn't, nothing was hitting. None of it was vibing. And I was just like getting more and more frustrated and flustered. I was like literally starting to sweat. I'm sure the nicotine withdrawals had a lot to do with it, but I like, and I think that the how it seemed like maybe it was just how I was coming off, but maybe it was also like what I was doing. It didn't really feel that inspired, and I feel like other people could tell because the numbers on the stream just were going down and down and down. And by the hour and a half mark, it had gone down to 3, to 2, to 1, which I think honestly might have just been me with my own Twitch chat open. And then I just quietly ended the stream, and I actually was just kind of really having a bad night. And I was like, fuck this. I hated like what I made. It sounded shitty to me, but this is what I'm using now, and it sounds kind of cool. Like it's a little inconsistent, right? Throughout this, but you know, it really goes to show that sometimes it's really hard to tell without that greater context. It's really hard to tell if you're just doing a bunch of sound design, a mudpie at one note. It can be really hard to tell whether or not it will make sense or sound good in when you start to utilize it in like an arrangement context or whatever. But this is one of those sounds. This was from last night, and it sounds kind of cool, so I should probably go easier on myself. So, recap. Few parameters. Start. This is where the sampler position starts from. Pitch envelope amount. These are optional, the pitch envelope stuff. I don't always do this, but it is a nice extra layer of articulation. So here's no pitch envelope at all. So when this is at 0, it doesn't matter what this is. Also, let me zoom out a bit because I don't know if I was covering it. The start position, the pitch envelope amount, which right now I just set to 0. Pull this up so I can see where that moment of silence is. This is just, I can see it because it's a longer moment of silence. I don't know how long the sample is. It's probably no longer than 10 minutes. But I'll at least know, like, if I'm in that little gap, then to just not go there. Ideally, I would, like, chop this up and just not have that sounds be in there. I'm just holding shift right now to move this. So it won't always display visually. Like there's so many points of information that it is greater than what my monitor can display or what Ableton will show me. So sometimes, yeah, like I'll make a change here even though it does not appear as though I did. Nice. So let's run it back. All right, now let's just cover one more thing really quick. Maybe on this one, on the second half here. What the hell? The fuck? Aha, I think it's because the start position. Okay, so here on the second half, I'm just going to leave a couple moments of silence. Because now I want to do a little reverb throw. I have a rack for this. It's called Reverb. Reverb Ini. Ini Audi. All right, I'll put this maybe after the OTT. And all this rack is it's those that utility rack I made where it's just the ceiling is set to 0. I have one for the input and one for the output here. And then I have a reverb sandwiched in between 2 EQs. You know, this, I might not always have an EQ here, but I'll probably usually have an EQ after the fact. It might end up being something like this or whatever, or something like this. I'll just leave it like this for now. And so I don't use the out as nearly as often as I use the in, right? So if I just flick this in, then we'll get just like a momentary one shot of like whatever the color and the timbre of the bass in the mids in particular are at and how it sounds on the moment that I flick this is how the reverb will sound, more or less. So turn that down. Maybe play with this a bit. I'm just going to automate this. So you'll notice that, you know, since this is a send, or this is the input volume before the reverb, and it's in parallel with the dry, right? It won't matter if I like turn this down like this, like after the bass MIDI is done, it's not going to stop the reverb from happening. It's just going to stop the input to the reverb. If I wanted to cut the reverb, that's what I would use the output one for. So like, maybe like this. So this is the in, this is the out. But one of the things I like so much about this approach is just how flexible it is and how much mileage you can get out of it, because it ultimately boils down to whatever the sample inside the sampler is that you're using, right? And the reason I whoopsie. And the reason I like phase plant is because, I mean, come on, you can do, this is like, I'm not even, this use case, I might as well not be using phase plant because I'm not like utilizing phase plant nearly even anywhere close to its like fullest extent. But like there's so many effects that you can do, and you can also do routing. Like Snap Heap is basically like a rack. If I load up Snap Heap, these are just like effects chains, and each of these chains, they're all in series. So this one goes into this one, goes into this one, goes into this one. So if I had like a distortion and then a filter, then what we're going to hear is a distorted sound that is then filtered. And it doesn't matter if I put this here or here or here, because this comes first and then this comes later. Yes, it goes through all these empty lanes first, but this is going to be exactly the same as if this was here. The only reason it's sounding different is probably that start position. So like, just like how I want the automation for the start position to start a little bit before the MIDI, I also want to make sure that if I want it to sound reliably the same, if I'm trying to like make sure that you know, everything's sounding good, then I'll play it as well. I'll hit spacebar from a few moments before the MIDI starts. But if you want to make things in parallel in Snap Heap, you can just press this button. So now when this button is on, these two lanes are going to be in parallel. So like if I did, I could do like a low and a high split. I'll control click and drag this, change that to a high pass. So this, now they're in series. You have a low pass signal going into a high pass signal, which basically means you're not really going to have a signal. Because like we filtered out all this up here, and then we filtered out all this down here, so we're effectively left with basically nothing. But if I turn this in parallel again, then this here could be where I put my play, my volume knob. So gain, I'll set this to %. I'll call this play. I'll map this to 100 or 50%, I suppose, and then I'll bring this down to 0. So now this goes up to 100. And then I will, I also realized that I like was playing with this automation earlier, but it was not making a difference because it wasn't, I had that shit muted. But like I'll configure, I'll right click this, assign automation slot, boom, wiggle it. So now it shows up here, play, and I'll map this to play. Let me move this out of the way first. Play is the 5th one. Play. So another thing too, right? Sometimes doing these splits, like if the low end is really all over the place in terms of its level, which in this case, I don't really know that it is. I don't think that it is really. What I could do is I could turn off this filter and I'll turn this off. So now this signal is just going to be high passed. I could just add a separate oscillator right here. I'll do analog, make a sine wave. And then I'll have this not go to this lane because this lane has the snap heap, which has this high pass, which means that I would lose out on this sub. I'll send this sub to lane 2. Now, if I wanted, I could have this sub sort of have a little bit of that play movement, a little bit of that volume movement too. I could have it go along with it a little bit. But in order to do that, I'll actually probably want to unmap this, this knob here. And what I'll do is I'll do a play right here inside of faceplant, because this one is inside of the snap heap that's inside of faceplant. It's like Inception. And I'll take this and I'll map it to here, bring this down like this. So now you can see when I move this, it corresponds over here. Now I'll configure this again. Map this to 5, which is already mapped to play. And now here's sub. This is sampler slash mids slash highs. I could also map this to the gain a little bit here on this. I would probably not do it all the way because then you just kind of lose out a little bit too much on the sub and it starts to sound kind of like wimpy. I usually like to have it not go to negative infinity at least. But sometimes I don't even really do this. And if I do, it'll probably be just like a really little amount like this. But there's so much that you could do inside of Phase Plant now, right? Like maybe I'll add a distortion here at the end. Maybe a slice EQ, just because you can get really wacky with them. Oh, but maybe let's actually, hold on. Let's get out of this snap heap here, because this is the snap heap that's only on this, right? So I'll do a snap heap over here, because this is getting both the sub and the sampler with the mids and highs. Open this up, do a slice EQ into a distortion. Maybe turn off DC. I mean, that's up to you. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm not going to get into that right now. And then I'll do some shit in here. Oh, here's one of my favorite things about Phase Plant, though, for this approach, right? So you notice how I just dragged this peak up really high, right? But as the note changes, this peak stays right where it is. So it almost like doesn't feel like it's a part of the instrument, right? It almost instead sounds like we're inside of like a pipe or like inside of some artificial space. At least that's the impression that it leaves on me whenever I hear an EQ peak kind of like this, or a filter peak that doesn't move with the notes. It almost sounds more like an amplifier, right? Or like a formant or something or whatever. But if you add a note module down here in the modulators tab section, and then just play with the root. Doesn't even matter really what the root is. It's just gonna kind of move the center. But I'll set it basically to where the root is on this. And then I'm gonna map this to the cutoff 100% on both of these. And now it's gonna sound like it's a part of the instrument. Let's see, move these a bit. Let's fuck with these a little so it doesn't sound stupid. I feel like that's probably it. I feel a little, like I said, a little disheveled. I'm withdrawing from nicotine. I was like crunching the numbers, just trying to see like how much nicotine I was probably getting on a daily basis. It was probably around 100 millis. So I think like even though I've been weaning off, I basically did kind of cold turkey in a lot of ways, where I went from 100 basically down to probably like 20 or so. So like, yeah, and among those symptoms, besides irritability, besides mood swings, besides depression and stuff, is like delirium and confusion and like memory, like forgetfulness. And I don't remember what my point even was just now, but I really like how this sounds now. Yesterday I was having a really bad day. If you asked me yesterday, or if you were even watching the stream yesterday, you would have been like, wow, this sound sucks, and Keota is acting weird, and why is he all sweaty, and why doesn't he do something else? Is he even going to use this sound? Why does he always do this? But, it's just funny how it works, because some of these sounds are fucking cool as shit sounding. I'm actually quite surprised. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say though. Yeah, I didn't rehearse this. I'm gonna put chapters in here, so you can skim through and stuff. But I would have liked to have been a little bit more articulate, a little bit more well spoken. But these are things that I need to just like train with my mind over a long period of time of like kind of weaning myself off of not only nicotine, but just like impulsive behavior. I'm a drug addict. Um, and it's a ebb in the flow. I have like lows and highs with that, you know, it might be over the course of 6 months to a year or longer that I am like slowly like improving in that regard. Um, and like making progress and like finding a healthier balance in my life. And then same on the inverse might be the opposite where I'm like kind of ramping up and it's just so slow I don't even notice it, right? Like before I know it, I'm having 2 Red Bulls a day for 2 weeks straight and I'm like, holy shit, like I gotta like, you know, chill. um Before I know it, I'm smoking weed every day, and before I know it, I'm smoking weed like half the day every day. I haven't been doing that lately, but that's kind of like besides the point. But I think that I kind of recently felt like I had hit like a critical mass of what I can handle in terms of just like my well-being and my physical and mental health. Wasn't feeling good about vape, and vape, it just cascades into all the other things. Like the more I'm vaping, the more I want caffeine, the more I want to abuse my Adderall, the more I want to, you know, have just not a good relationship with my body or anything. So I would have liked to have been more articulate with this. I would have liked for this video to maybe be half as long, but I also wanted to get it out there, right? And I don't know that I would have if I you know, thought too much about it. Where I'm re-recording it a bunch. I already almost gave up. I started this video. This is, I think, the 4th take. I only made it maybe 5-10 minutes in each time, and this is the last one. And if I were to do this again, there would be a very high chance that this video would not have gotten posted. But hey, if there's anything I wasn't clear on, please feel free to just say something in the comments, ask me a question. If you are on the student tier of the Patreon and you've not gotten a lesson, don't worry, those never expire. If you haven't already gotten any of those, whether it's been 6 months or a year, I don't care. I consider each month like you're stocking up, right? So if you've been subbed to that tier for 6 months, then I owe you 6 hours worth of lessons. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions about this if there's anything I kind of forgot to go over. I would like to make a video that's dedicated just to phase plant, just kind of running through everything about phase plant. This video is really just about that kind of sampler based approach. You know, talking about where I learned it from with KOAN Sound, starting with simpler, going into sampler, and then ending in phase plant. Phase plant's an incredibly powerful synth. I really, really recommend getting it. If you got $10, you can use phase plant for a month. Again, it is basically rent to own, right? For every month that you have it, you get like $10 worth of credits. Where since phase plant is $200, that means that if you're sub for 20 months, then you can cash in those credits, and then you don't need to be subscribed anymore, and you can own phase plant. So highly recommend that. But I appreciate you so much. I thank you so much for being patient with me. I had a really busy fall. Not like I even want to make any excuses, because I got a huge back catalog of stuff. Probably not everybody's seen it, but like I do feel a duty to keep putting out stuff on a regular basis. And the fall was a little slow, but I'm really feeling like I'm back at it. I don't want to take any of you guys for granted. I really appreciate all the support. Feel free to tell your friends. Of course, that would mean a lot. If you do, if you get some people subbed to this Patreon, or if you get people booking lessons with me, I will hook it up, right? If you get anybody get a lesson with me, I'll give you a free lesson. If you get people subbed to the Patreon, I'll give you a free lesson. It really goes a long way. Scary times these days, really just trying to keep my head on straight and just trying to focus and just trying to get that discipline, because something I've always struggled with. And I think with where things are headed, discipline will be more and more pivotal for us to acquire and develop and maintain. But I have a lot of love for all you guys. Really, really, really can't say it enough. Appreciate you so much. Thank you for the support. And I'll see you on the streams. I hope you have a lovely evening, lovely day, whatever. I don't know what time it is once I end up posting this, but peace out. Thanks again. Bye-bye.